Right, the roots of the Licensed Victuallers School were planted in 18th century London, the age of enlightenment if you were a philosopher, a period of poverty, squalor and disease if you were amongst the unfortunate lower classes. Amongst these people there were small businesses operated called licensed premises, and the owners were licensees. They of course were very vulnerable. Being a little better off than the general population that made up their customers, they were prone to crime and more particularly the whole range of diseases that their customers brought to them. And they were many and potentially fatal. They needed some sort of mutual support, and they therefore formed a society with the purpose of helping and assisting each other in times of need. The society prospered, and they started to publish a news sheet which was sent round to members in order to keep them informed of what was happening in and around the city. That news sheet grew gradually into a daily paper, the Morning Advertiser, which in the 19th century was to become a broadsheet and a major rival of the Times, and in fact it looked very like the Times. However, as papers are inclined to do, it made quite a lot of money, and so by the end of the century the committee of the Society of Licensed Victuallers were looking for ideas about how to beneficially use this rather unexpected income. They didn't have far to look. There were waifs on the streets of London who were the children of what were broadly termed deceased, decayed or distressed licensees. And you don't have to go very far to see what their lives were like. Charles Dickens, who at one time was a reporter on the Morning Advertiser, wrote about things that he observed, not necessarily things that he imagined. The life for a child could be very bad. In other parts of the country, children were being sent down mines because they were cheaper than pit ponies. They were used in factories increasingly as the industrial revolution grew. And in London, they were sent up chimneys, they were used in criminal pursuits and generally abused. And consequently, the idea came to the society to found a school. And they assembled the money, started proceedings, and by 1804 they had purchased property in Kennington Lane, conveniently situated opposite a playing field known as the Oval, and they started there to recruit pupils. The pupils were given new clothes in colours of brown and gold, the colours in fact of hops and ale, and they of course had separate entrances, but apart from that it was, I believe, arguably the first co-educational boarding school in the country, if not in the world. Things progressed quite well. A headmistress was recruited. Unfortunately she didn't last very long. She was dismissed when it was discovered that her daughter was receiving gentlemen callers on Sundays. You can let your imagination play around with that idea. However, the school, despite that, continued to prosper and became very well known, to such an extent that when they had put together even more charitable funds, they embarked on a policy to build a brand new school on roughly the same site. At that time, William IV, who was a friend of licensees for various reasons, became patron of the school, and the new building was opened. And an interesting factor of that, it became a very eminent building in London, and when the Great Exhibition was held in 1851, an artist up in a balloon over Hampstead Heath drawing a view of London chose to point out the Licensed Victuallers School as one of the prominent buildings in the view to the southeast. The pupils in the school, apart from being well clothed, were very well fed compared with the local population, but it's interesting to see in the minutes of the society that they were also given a ration each day of a loaf of bread and half a pint of small ale. Small ale is particularly interesting in that it was made from the residue of an original brew. When the beer was drawn off, that was filled again with water, and the yeast that was still there fermented again. It didn't make very strong beer, but it was free from disease and therefore drinkable. Okay. Despite this, the school inevitably lost pupils through illness. Very regularly there was a death in the school, and even more regularly children fell down with illnesses such as polio and tuberculosis. There was no way they could cure these children. What they did, hopefully, was maintain a boarding house in Margate where the children could be sent, hopefully to benefit from the sea air. There are no records that I know of that record the success or degree of success of this process. The end purpose of the school at that time was to set some examinations to check that the children had become literate and numerate, and they had inspectors invited in to carry out this function. But apart from that, the objective was to find children work when they left the school. And the standard outcome was that girls were prepared for a career in service, and the boys would be bought an apprenticeship at a cost of approximately 13 shillings and sixpence. That building served them very well for the next 90 years, and it wasn't until that time that the pressure of local business and the growth of London made the licensed victuallers think in terms of building a new school in a more rural location. The decision was therefore taken to move the school to a country estate, interestingly on the outskirts of Slough, where there was a much more rural atmosphere at the time, and a building was bought which had been the Royal Hotel, built by an entrepreneur who thought there would be lots of visitors coming from London to visit Windsor Castle. Unfortunately, he was undermined by the fact that the station was then opened in Windsor and his business rather failed, and the building was sold and became a school. Can I just interrupt there to say I can't remember the name of that school, but it was a boys' school, and it later moved elsewhere. It was the school that sold the building to the licensed victuallers, not the hotel owner.
Oh, right.
There was a school in between, and with a bit of research I could probably identify what school it was.
Okay.
The Royal Hotel had been previously converted into a school, and it was from that school that the licensed victuallers purchased the building and operated their school in that original building.
Right.
It wasn't satisfactory, it hadn't been designed as a school, and they therefore put their minds to building a new school, and that new school was opened in 1936. And one has to say at this time that in order to build that, they needed a great deal of financial support, and the brewers and distillers of various companies were very helpful in contributing to that. The new building, which was opened in 1936, proved very popular in many respects. In fact, the Slough Council wanted to purchase it for their council offices, but the society refused to sell it. And before very much more had developed on the site, the war was declared, and that introduced all sorts of problems. For one thing, male teachers became very difficult to find, and so the teaching staff was pulled together in as many ways as possible by recruiting from elsewhere around the area. There was a problem in that the council wanted to put air raid shelters in the grounds, and the committee of licensed victuallers were unwilling to do that, except that the council then suggested that they would commandeer the site, and so the committee then agreed that they might consent to shelters being built towards the front of the site. Those of you who remember the site well may not remember the air raid shelters, but they are under what became the hard tennis courts after the war. Yes, after the war, the school, which had been struggling for teaching staff, as I mentioned, received a great deal of help from one or two brewers, notably Whitbread and Courage and Guinness, who were concerned that the Society of Licensed Victuallers perhaps didn't have enough educational expertise to develop the school further. And they got together with the society and formed an advisory committee which was able to give much broader advice on how the school could be developed. They also contributed very substantial funds to building such additional places as the science laboratories, the sports hall and the craft block.
Did you know about the introduction of day pupils, whether that was a decision they made to make?
I think that was Charles Hart. I think Charles Hart came to the school in '50, and then he introduced day pupils. One of the notable ones was the son of a local doctor, Max Jarrett. And during the time I was at the school, the cedar tree at the front was inclined to shed seed, and you got little seedlings growing around it. So I dug up a few of these, and Bill Brake had one on his estate in Kent, and it was the last time I saw Bill, it was up to about 20 feet. Is about thinking of the building in London. That was bought by the NAFI.
Yes, that's right.
Whether they're still there, I don't know. But just as we were building the school in Ascot, they contacted us to say they still had the clock off the original school.
Oh, do they?
A large tower clock. And they gave it back to us. It went to Ascot, and if you think of it, there's a sort of central arcade down the school, and the clock stands, or it did.
Right.
In the middle.
That's interesting. So it's at the school?
Yes. It was round about the time of the Falklands that we went and collected that, because they were told, of course the NAFI know quite a lot about what goes on in the army, and they were saying the Argentinians were very clever. They invaded the Falklands on a Friday, and nobody in the Ministry of Defence takes any interest in what happens from Friday until Monday. So no action was taken by the armed forces until the news reached them on the Monday.